What's up guys? So today I'm going to be teaching you how to edit your photos that you took on your phone. So this is the photo that I'm going to edit. I don't have the raws from the last video that you've seen, but we're going to be editing this one that I edited from a car show that me and the other guy Zach went to not too long ago. So basically what I want to start with is cropping it to Instagram size. That best size is going to be 4x5, I believe. Yes, it's 4x5. And so at this point I want to get it into the best possible spot to be into the center of the frame. Well, into the center of the grid, center of the frame, whichever way. Kind of like that, but I'm going to bring it up just a tad bit more. And then we'll run with that. I like that. So then after that, I'm going to mess with the exposure just a little bit, so that way I can bring up the details that I want to bring out. And then we'll go back and mess with the lighting spot after. So I'm going to bring up the exposure. I see some details of the intercooler right here and just the whole overall front end of the car. So then I always add just a little bit of contrast, not too much, so that way I'm not overdoing it. You can mess with the highlights. Overall is just going to make the sky a lot more blue, but we're going to go do that when we go into our masking tool later. So I'm going to leave those how they are. My shadows, you can see if you go to the left, it's going to negatively affect the image, and I don't really like that. But we're going to bring up the shadows. I probably will end up doing 10. And then whites and blacks, I don't typically mess with in my image at all, just because this image doesn't really need to be messed with when it comes to the white or blacks. You can, that's totally up to you, but that's just not how my editing style goes. So you can click on the eye so you can see what you've done and what the original looks like. So now that we're done with that, actually before we go on to the next part, we're going to go to the curve. So you're going to make 3 little points across the grid, and basically we're just going to make an S. I'll bring that down just a tad. This up, and then you can also see how you like it. So honestly, I like going down on this one a lot more, so which means I'll bring this one up. It'll bring your shadows up. Then this one is when you start getting into your highlights. You can see how it kind of starts to fade into white a little bit, just a little bit above the building. And so I want to try and keep as much of that as blue as possible. Alright, so you can see I barely messed with it, but it's enough to honestly make a big difference. It's not as blue, the car, it's not as blue as it was, but we're going to be going back and adding a lot more blue into that when we go into the masking panel. So at this point, this is still, you're still editing your overall image. I like my shots to be a little warmer, but not too warm. So I'll probably stop around like 5600, close enough. I'm actually going to add a bit of vibrance to this, so maybe like 12. And then same thing with saturation, I'm just going to keep it right there. I don't mess with my color grading, personally, but you can. But we're going to go into the color panel. I always 100% get rid of your last two, your magentas and purples. And then that's when you start bringing the blues back in. But then this still overall affects the image versus what we're going to do in a little bit. So I like this. Just a little more blue and gets rid of the green, just a tad. And now we'll go into effects, add a little bit of texture, maybe 10, and then we'll get rid of some clarity, maybe like 18 to 20. So that way it kind of gives it that fuzzy feeling for the whole overall image, which is sometimes really nice, and then sometimes it's too much. But for this, I'm going to get rid of some clarity because we're going to bring some back on the car in just a little while. And then dehaze, I'll probably bring up to about 10. Detail. So iPhones already come with a lot of sharpening that they do in the processing of making the image. And so at this point, what we're going to do is go down to your masking. And so I'm holding it, but you don't see nothing. On Mac, I don't know how this is on Windows, but on Mac, you hold your Option key, and it'll bring up every single line that you'll end up sharpening of the overall image. So I'm going to bring mine up to about 55, which I think is really nice. And then we're going to take some sharpening out of it, just because, like I said, with iPhones, they're always sharpening a lot during the processing of when you're taking the photo. So when you look at all these photos that people are posting without even editing them, they're very, very sharpened spots that you possibly don't even really want sharpened. So now what we'll do is we'll see the before and after. So on the Mac, it's the backslash. So it's the original, and then shows what we've done so far. Just a little bit, nothing too crazy, nothing too outstanding of a photo. But now we're gonna get into the mask. So what you'll do is click on your subject, and then we'll wait for it to detect it. And at this point, it did an okay job, but I don't want Belk or the Supra to be touched really. And so we'll go to the minus, and we'll use our brush tool. And then I'm gonna mess with my exposure just a little bit. I wanna bring out some really nice detail in the car. Because we brought back just a little bit earlier, but with the masking, we're able to bring back so much more since we shot in RAW. So I'm gonna add just a little bit of contrast. It makes it a little more blue. And I'm gonna up the shadows just a tad. And you could tell that the intercooler and the whole front of the car, it brought a little more pizzazz. It brought a little more pizzazz in the details out in the photo. So at this point, I'm not gonna mess with the tone curve. I'm not gonna mess with the color, temperature, or tint, but I will mess with the saturation because we did earlier, but I want the car to be more blue. So I'm gonna add maybe about 18. But you could tell it added a little more blue to the front of the car, especially right here on the hood. I don't know if you can see it, but it added a little more blue for us. So now what we're gonna do is go into effects, and I'm gonna add more texture again, maybe just a little bit, not as much as I did earlier on the overall image, but now since we're messing with the car, I'm gonna add just a little bit of texture. And then this is where we come in and add the clarity, because we want the car to pop out versus the more blurred background. So I'm gonna add maybe 18 to 20, and then we're gonna dehaze it so that way it's a little darker. Maybe, literally not even much, maybe like 4. And I'm perfectly fine with that. As you can see, we went from that on the original to this, which looks 10 times better in my opinion, but we're still not done. So we're gonna add another mask, and we're gonna add a linear gradient. And we'll bring this up right past under the car. So you can fixate that how you want. I want it to mess with just a little bit back there under the Mustang. And then so at this point, we will subtract the subject. Hopefully this does a better job this time. There's still a little bit that we can erase, so we'll go through and erase that. We still have the small brush, so. Get this done. All right, that's where I want it. So at this point, I'm gonna mess with light, and I'm gonna mess with just 2 or 3 things. I'm gonna bring it down so it's just a little darker, and then I will go down to effects. I'm gonna dehaze it. As you could tell, the shadows definitely get a little bit darker. I don't know if you can see it with this one. This shadow, it got a lot darker. And then their overall shadows of the people up here. So I actually don't want to bring it down that much, maybe 40. And then what we'll end up doing is bringing some clarity into it, just a little bit, not much. And then we'll take some texture out, because if you see the texture, it goes up. That makes everything more clear when it comes to the front of the car and the ground right at the front of the car, which I'm not necessarily wanting that. So I'm just gonna take just a tad bit out. So that's what we're at so far. That's the original and what we're at with just the 2 masks already. But I like to do the background. So that way this time we're gonna be getting the Belk building. And so what we'll do is we'll subtract the sky. Does a good job there. And then we'll subtract a linear gradient. And we'll bring this pretty much all the way until it goes to where I think is the bottom of the building, right where the base is. And now we will also add a brush, so that way we're getting the Belk sign on the building in the image. I don't want these people to be affected because I'm going to bring back some brightness in here. And then I also don't really want this Supra to be affected, which I don't think I did this in the last video. I don't think I did this when I recently edited them, but we're going to do it today for the purposes of this video, and I actually want to see the difference. All right, so now we're left with that. And I'm going to bring back, actually, that does not do exactly what I wanted it to do. So what we'll do is go to my shadows, and actually, we're just going to darken it. I like that a lot better. But we'll add the contrast, and we'll go down here to the color wheel. Hopefully this will add some red in it, but it doesn't. And so now at this point, what I want to do, the last thing that I want to do is touch on the sky. And so it's got the sky selected, as you can tell, does a really good job with that. Now we're going to mess with the exposure. I'm going to bring it up. I'm going to bring it up just a tad, so that way, you know, it's still pretty bright back there because we did bring down the exposure on the building. And so we're going to make it just a little more in the exposure, bring it up just a tad. And then we'll go to effects, and then we'll dehaze it just a tad. Just see what it does. See if there's any clouds that it brings out. And if not, honestly, you don't really have to bring it up as much. But I'm going to bring it up to 10. And honestly, I think that's a pretty good image. That's before we did all the masking, and that's after. And this is the original image, and this is the image now. So let's do this image together as well, because this is a more detailed shot versus the last shot. It was just pretty much the overall piece, the overall car. So we're gonna go back and we're gonna make this a 4x5. I'm gonna get this pretty much how I want. I like that little flare that's on the Porsche. So at that point, I'm gonna make sure I keep it in the photo, and then I'm just gonna drag it up just a little bit. I think that's really good, but I'm gonna bring it down just a tad. I think that's better. That's perfect. So we'll mess with the light again. I'm gonna bring up some of the exposure so I can see the detail that I'm trying to bring out. I'll add just a little bit of contrast because you can see there's a yellow caliper. I don't really know how much of that you will be able to tell in the end, but we're gonna try and do our best to make sure we can see that. And so if you bring down your shadows, you also won't be able to see too much of the overall tire of the car. And so I'm going to bring it up just a tad. I'm not going to mess with my curve on this one. Actually, let's do it. Let's add the curve. Let's mess with it a little bit. So I'll bring this up. It adds a little bit of fade to the front of the image, which I don't necessarily want. So I'm going to bring this one down. And so at that point, if I bring the middle one up, it's going to add that extra bit of fade towards the top, which is my highlights, because I'm working my way up towards my highlights versus my shadows. So I actually think it looks pretty cool at the windshield coming over right here, and then all the way to where the flare is. And so at this point, what we're going to do now is mess with the bottom part, and you can see right here when I'm messing with it what is getting affected. You can see it be a little darker or a little lighter. I said that backwards, but so you can see it go a little darker, and you can see it go a little lighter. What I'm going to do is I'm going to actually make it go a little lighter. So then you can see what you've done with that versus that. It kind of gave it that little bit of darker feeling on the tire, but more fuzzier on the outside, which when we create a mask for the tire, you'll be able to see the details a lot more. And so the color for this one, I'm obviously going to add the vibrance. Let's go to 15 for both, just because that's what I like doing. And then we'll go down to the color mixer. So since I said the caliper is yellow, and then we also see in the Porsche symbol that there is the gold, black, and red. And I guess you could say a little bit of yellow. So we're going to go into the color panel, and we'll find yellow. And also it's going to mess with a little bit of where the sun is down here, where the sun is hitting. I want this to be more orange though, just a tad. You can see it mess with the luminance. Now you can see the brake caliper get a little bit brighter when it comes into the color aspect. And so we'll add just a little bit of red because there's some red in the wheel. I want to make it right there. That's perfect. Not much of a difference, and that's perfect. This is exactly what we want. The smaller you move your adjustments, the bigger the difference is going to make. So whatever you're editing to get it to where you want it, the smaller the adjustments, the bigger the difference. So we'll go into our effects. We'll add some texture. Get rid of some clarity. I think about 15 will be perfect. And we'll see what dehazing does to this one. I like a little bit of dehaze on this one, just because the overall blue in the sky. Well, let's add just a tad, maybe like 5 or 6. Now here it comes back to the detail. I'm going to go ahead and hit my option key, drag this up until I see pretty much at that point is where I want it. And I'm going to drag this down. So that's the before. It's a little dark. We want to bring back some detail, but also make sure that Porsche stays beautiful. That's where we're at right now. So we'll go into the masking. We'll go to subjects. Almost. So we'll go to brush. All right. So I like this. This is perfect. Now what I'm going to do is click on my light. I'm going to bring back some detail. You can already tell the amount of detail we're already bringing back. I'm going to add a little bit of contrast. This time I'm going to add a little bit more to see what that does to the image. And then the shadows, I'm going to bring up just a bit. So that way I can see that beautiful caliper on that beautiful Porsche and the hubcap. I'm not going to mess with my panel. I'm going to bring up the or my curve, my point curve. So I'm going to bring up the saturation and make that yellow pop even more. And then I'm going to add a little bit of texture. Add some clarity. And then dehaze it just a tad, because if you go the opposite way, it's going to bring back. Actually, I like that. We'll go about 13 to 12. I like that a lot. So now we're going to add another one. This time we're just going to do it for the ground. Subtract my subject. So we'll get rid of this, and then we'll get everything else around it. So I'm going to make it just a little darker. Not too much. I think that's perfect. Versus it almost completely blown out on the bottom. And so there is your before, and that's your after. If you learned something new today, go ahead and hit that subscribe button, that like button, and leave a comment down below which car was your favorite. And hopefully I get to see you guys in the next one.